We have attorney Jim Monroe. He's a bankruptcy attorney right here in Orlando. Jim, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you, Tom.
Jim, let's talk about this term, stripping off second mortgages. So somebody owns a home, they got a big old first mortgage, they got a big old second mortgage. Sometimes through bankruptcy, that second mortgage will be stripped off and thrown away. It's not a lien against their property anymore.
That's right, but that's only now in Chapter 13. Recently, the Supreme Court has said we can't do it in a Chapter 7. And what I mean by stripping off a wholly unsecured second mortgage is this kind of example. Your house is worth $150,000. You have a first mortgage of $100,000 and a second mortgage of like $75,000. Because you're underwater on your first mortgage, the second mortgage can be stripped off in a Chapter 13.
It used to be able to be done in a Chapter 7, now only in a Chapter 13.
Yes, that's because of a recent decision through the United States Supreme Court.
And what was the court's thinking in that process? I mean, clearly it was not pro-consumer.
No, it was a complicated look at the different chapters in bankruptcy, and quite frankly, only the 11th Circuit in the entire United States allowed you to do that. That's Florida, Georgia, and Alabama.
So it's really the minority view to begin with that we were in, and now we're kind of in line with the rest of the country.
That's correct, or they made it absolutely clear that you couldn't use Chapter 7.
Okay, so while I'm on that point, when somebody comes to see you and says, Jim Monroe, am I a candidate for bankruptcy, is there usually a choice as to whether they're going to be Chapter 7 or Chapter 13, or based on their circumstances, there's really no choice? It's either one or the other based on what's going on with them?
You have to take a look at the entire economic background of the family and also the income level, because if you have above a certain amount of income for your family size, you don't meet the qualifications of the means test, and therefore Chapter 7 is not good for you. You have to go and reorganize in a Chapter 13. There is one exception, and that is if your debts are overwhelmingly non-consumer debts like business debts, and you have more than 50% business debts or non-consumer debts, you can still file a Chapter 7.
Okay. Well, let's just say that somebody said, Jim, I'm in your situation. I got a house that's worth $150,000. My first mortgage is $100,000. My second mortgage is $75,000. Everything else financially is, looking good for me, reasonably good for me. I want to file a Chapter 13 only so I can strip off that second mortgage of $75,000. Could somebody do bankruptcy for that one and only purpose?
A lot of people take advantage of that, but then you run into the issue of good faith and bad faith. So that has to be examined, and it's examined within the context of all of their economic situation.
Well, when you say good faith and bad faith, do you mean what was their faith at the moment that they took out that second mortgage, or what is their faith at this moment in time?
Well, it's what their financial situation is at the time they filed the bankruptcy.
Okay. But what would be an example of bad faith? I mean, if the court said, hey, you're only coming in here to strip off that $75,000 second mortgage, not good enough, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, let's say you make $500,000 a year and you're trying to game the system. You have to remember that bankruptcy is a court of equity, and the judges weigh all the circumstances surrounding the filing.
All right. And then just out of curiosity, when you're trying to do something like that, how often does the bank, the lender, actually show up in court and say, hey, judge, don't do this for them?
Well, the banks are very well represented in the United States Bankruptcy Court, so they show up quite often as secured lenders. Now, as unsecured, we hardly ever see credit card representation or unsecured debt representation. But secured creditors generally show up a lot in bankruptcy court.
Everybody, my guest today is attorney Jim Monroe. He's a bankruptcy attorney right here in Orlando. My name is Tom Olsen.